The inherent resilience of Atlantic salmon, especially the later life stages, post-molts, adults, to going without feed for quite a while.
They are surprisingly capable. The study walks through that physiological adaptation sequence, first using glycogen stores, then moving efficiently to burning lipids, fat stores, and only really under severe long-term fasting do they start breaking down muscle protein, proteolysis.
And a key point the research makes is that being ectotherms helps here.
Right, it does. Their metabolic processes are just inherently slower, more energy conserving during a fast compared to, say, mammals or birds.
They stretch those reserves further.
Precisely. And the data in the study is quite striking. It showed post-smolts in seawater. They can handle fasting up to 12 weeks.
A whole new era of communication in the global aquaculture industry is coming. Now you have the brightest minds in aquaculture right in your pocket. And what's best? You can listen to all of them while driving to a farm, traveling, or running errands. It's never been this good, and it's never been this simple. Welcome to the Aquaculture Podcast Show, the first AI-based podcast in aquaculture, where you'll find cutting-edge insights in everything that's working in aquaculture, nutrition, health, and production.
Okay, let's dive into a practice that's really fundamental in aquaculture management. Fasting in Atlantic salmon.
Right. It seems simple on the surface maybe, but applying it in farming, well, it brings up some significant technical and biological complexities.
Exactly, things that impact both fish performance and their welfare.
It's this interesting intersection, isn't it, between what's needed operationally and the actual physiology of the animal.
Yeah, we're not just talking about skipping a meal. It's about the biological responses, the real consequences for managing a farm effectively. So this deep dive, it's specifically looking at fasting in Atlantic salmon farming, its effects, and we're drawing heavily from a recent study that really examined these implications quite thoroughly.
And our goal here is basically to unpack that research. We want to understand the biological tolerance salmon have for fasting, look into the welfare aspects in different situations, and, distinguishing that voluntary fasting from the planned operational kind.
And also the practical challenges, the strategic side for aquaculture operations.
Exactly. Pull out the most important points from the study for professionals listening in.
Okay, let's start with the basics, the biology, because the study highlights something pretty remarkable.
Their resilience.
Yes, the inherent resilience of Atlantic salmon, especially the later life stages, post-molts, adults, to going without feed for quite a while.
They are surprisingly capable. The study walks through that physiological adaptation sequence, first using glycogen stores, then moving efficiently to burning lipids, fat stores, and only really under severe long-term fasting do they start breaking down muscle protein, proteolysis.
And a key point the research makes is that being ectotherms helps here.
Right, it does. Their metabolic processes are just inherently slower, more energy conserving during a fast compared to, say, mammals or birds.
They stretch those reserves further.
Precisely. And the data in the study is quite striking. It showed post-smolts in seawater. They can handle fasting up to 12 weeks.
12 weeks. Wow.
Yeah, with pretty minimal overall body mass loss, too, something like 8 to 11%. And crucially, most of that loss is visceral fat. They really conserve the muscle protein.
So they're not rapidly eating into vital tissue.
Not in those scenarios, no.
And this resilience, it's backed up by metabolic downregulation, too.
Yes, that's a clear physiological response the study documented. A significant drop in their standard metabolic rate.
How much of a drop?
Around 23% after just 4 weeks of fasting. It's a direct energy conservation tactic.
And reversible, I assume.
Oh, yes. The study points that out clearly. Refeeding brings them back to pre-fasting metabolic levels pretty quickly, shows their physiological plasticity.
The research even looked at thermal stress during fasting.
They did. Found that even at moderately high temperatures, like 18 degrees Celsius, the fasted fish kept their aerobic scope, their critical swimming speeds, for at least 4 weeks.
Okay.
So that specific data, it supports the study's conclusion that, properly managed short-term fasting.
Like for handling or transport.
Exactly. Or pre-slaughter gut clearance. It isn't inherently harmful to robust, healthy fish populations.
Okay, that covers the planned operational side. But the study draws a really critical line when fasting is voluntary.
It absolutely does, and that's a vital distinction for management. Voluntary fasting isn't usually a tool. The study frames it as a symptom.
A symptom of what?
Usually that the fish are in suboptimal environmental conditions. and that raises much bigger welfare concerns than planned fasting.
What kind of conditions trigger this voluntary fasting, according to the study?
The research points mainly to conditions outside their optimal range, things like thermal limits being pushed, temperatures getting too high, or periods of low dissolved oxygen.
So stress conditions.
Right. Under that kind of stress, they actually suppress their appetite. It's like the energetic cost of feeding, digestion, metabolism under those poor conditions is just too high, or maybe physically difficult.
So they shut down feeding to conserve energy.
Physiologically driven to do so, yeah.
And the study had real-world examples of this happening.
Yes, it referenced field data showing voluntary fasting going on for over 90 days during summer heat waves in some areas.
90 days? That's significant.
Very. And the result wasn't just slow growth, it was a significant drop in condition factor, changes in feeding behavior, clear signs of chronic stress.
And that combination of high temperature and low oxygen, it limits their aerobic capacity, forces a metabolic compromise.
It really does. They have to prioritize just essential functions. So the study's key message on voluntary fasting is that this inability or unwillingness to feed under those conditions, it's a direct, sensitive indicator of compromised welfare.
A clear signal the environment isn't right.
Undeniable, really.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. The study also touched on a less explored area, how fasting might affect disease vulnerability.
Yeah, and the research itself acknowledges this needs more work, but the initial findings reported do suggest potential immune impacts, especially maybe in younger fish.
What did it find for freshwater smolts?
Well, studies on 55-gram freshwater smolts showed suppressed expression of some immune genes. Also, reduced production of certain plasma proteins involved in immune function after 4 weeks without feed.
Which sounds concerning on the face of it.
It could seem that way, but the study also noted a specific kind of reactive immune response.
How so?
When these fasted fish were actually challenged with the pathogen, they showed a much more dramatic, sort of acute upregulation of certain defense proteins compared to fish that were fed continuously.
Interesting. So they can still mount a response.
They can, definitely.
So what's the practical takeaway the study suggests there?
The implication, as the research frames it, is that while they have this reactive ability, the energy cost of launching such a strong response while fasted might be really substantial.
Okay.
And that could potentially make them more vulnerable if they face repeated or chronic disease challenges without a chance to recover nutritionally. It's a potential cost.
Makes sense. Now, beyond physiology and immunity, behavior is always a key welfare indicator. Did the study look at that?
It did, and it highlighted some important differences depending on the life stage. Post-smolts, for instance.
The more resilient ones we talked about earlier.
Right. They showed minimal signs of increased aggression or changes in fin condition, even during fasts up to 8 weeks long.
But that changes for younger fish.
Oh, significantly. The research indicated that juveniles, like par in freshwater, they can show more aggression, signs of dorsal fin damage, even after pretty short fasting periods.
So a clear life stage risk there that needs managing.
Absolutely. Very stage specific.
And can things like learned feed anticipation make it worse?
Yes, the study mentioned that. Especially if feeding cues, like noises or whatever, are inconsistent or delayed. Fish learn quickly, and that anticipation without the reward, it could potentially ramp up aggression, especially in sensitive or already fasted groups.
Right. The study also mentioned fasting in recirculation systems, RAS, specifically for removing off flavors.
Ah, yes, depuration. That's standard practice in RAS, purging things like geosmin, MIB from the flesh before processing.
How long do those fasts typically last?
Protocols vary a lot. Could be just a couple of days, could be up to maybe 15 days. Depends on the compound, the temperature, the system specifics.
And did the study suggest this practice is a major welfare issue in RAS?
The evaluation in the study suggested that while the durations vary, this common practice for depuration in adult fish in RAS seems to fall within their physiological tolerance. Based on recent work, it wasn't presented by the study as inherently breaching welfare standards if it's managed correctly.
Okay. Let's circle back to the planned operational fasting. The study reinforces its role as just standard practice in aquaculture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Having a fasting period before certain procedures is just integral to efficient fish handling and processing now.
And figuring out how long to fast is mostly about gut evacuation time.
It is, and the research really underlines how variable that is. Depends heavily on water temperature and fish size.
Got any examples from the study?
Yeah, it gave specifics, like a 700-gram fish at 7 degrees Celsius might need up to 48 hours for good gut clearance. But bigger fish, say at colder temps like 4 degrees C, they might need up to 7 days. So you really need context-specific, temperature-adjusted plans.
And there are clear benefits to doing this pre-operational fast.
The study lists several. Reduced oxygen demand during transport or crowding, which helps stress tolerance, better slaughter hygiene, potentially better product quality, too.
Any other benefits mentioned?
It also noted a link between short-term fasting as a kind of preconditioning before stressful events, like maybe some parasite treatments, and seeing lower mortality rates afterward.
Interesting. But again, a warning for the early life stages before these operations.
Yes, the study emphasizes that again. Fasting juveniles before things like vaccination or grading, it can significantly increase the risk of aggression, injury, even secondary infections in those groups.
So that really hammers home the need for state-specific guidelines.
Critically important, according to the evidence presented.
Now, thinking about different production systems, the study also pointed out specific challenges fasting creates in RAS and offshore farms.
Right. Each system has its own unique vulnerabilities that fasting interacts with. For RAS, a main challenge the study detailed is how feed withdrawal can impact the stability of the biofilter.
Why is that? What's the mechanism?
Well, the research explains that those biofilters, they rely on a pretty steady stream of ammonia from fish waste to keep the nitrifying bacteria happy and active.
Okay.
When you fast the fish, that ammonia input plummets. And that can destabilize the microbial community, potentially compromising water treatment.
Any specific risks mentioned?
Yeah, this study specifically noted hydrogen sulfide production, H2S, highly toxic as a significant risk linked to feed withdrawal in RAS. Sometimes it's even been associated with mass mortality events.
Serious stuff.
Yeah.
And offshore systems. Different problems there, more weather-related.
Exactly. Keeping feeding consistent offshore can be tough due to rough weather, logistical issues. The study reiterated that while salmon can handle intermittent fasting biologically,
As we discussed with their resilience.
right, but repeated or long disruptions to feeding, that will negatively impact their growth and overall performance.
And the study suggests this needs to be factored into planning.
Absolutely. It implies that the potential for these storm-related feeding gaps is something that ought to influence site selection, maybe even farm design, especially with climate change predictions potentially meaning more extreme weather.
Okay, so let's try and pull all these different threads together. What are the main conclusions, the strategic takeaways the study offers the industry?
I think the research paints a really nuanced picture. Fasting is, unavoidable and sometimes beneficial in modern salmon farming, but its effects vary hugely.
Depends on duration, environment.
Exactly. Duration, the specific environment the fish are in, and maybe most crucially, the life stage. You've got that robust resilience in seawater fish, contrasting with greater welfare risks for the younger freshwater stages, and especially during that voluntary fasting driven by stress.
Which leads the study to propose some key welfare-based management strategies.
It does. The research argues for scientifically defining maximum voluntary fasting thresholds for different life stages, tying them directly to measurable things like water temperature and dissolved oxygen.
And limiting operational fasts, too.
Yes, strictly limiting those operational fasts based on solid gut evacuation data, specific to the fish size and water temperature.
And integrating monitoring seems critical.
Very much so. The study strongly suggests building real-time monitoring, tracking appetite, maybe some metabolic proxies, behavioral changes, right into comprehensive welfare scoring and management system.
And finally, tailoring protocols to the system type.
Yeah, developing adaptive, context-specific fasting protocols for systems like RAS and offshore. Protocols that explicitly account for those system-specific risks. We talked about biofilter stability in RAS, logistical or weather disruptions offshore. The research presents these as essential steps forward.
So the bottom line from this study really seems to be that a science-based, context-aware approach to managing fasting is just paramount.
It's presented as crucial, not just for ethical stewardship and fish welfare, but also as fundamental for achieving high-performance aquaculture while minimizing those biological and operational costs. It really informs day-to-day farm management.
This deep dive definitely highlights that duality of fasting. It's a necessary tool sometimes, but also a potential welfare challenge. And the outcome really hinges on getting the biological and environmental context right, as this work shows.
Thinking about the study's focus on real-time monitoring and needing these adaptive protocols, it makes you wonder what role could new sensing technologies, maybe advanced data analytics, play in really optimizing fasting for both welfare and production efficiency down the road?
That's a really interesting question to ponder as you digest these findings. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the Aquaculture Podcast Show on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to stay updated on the latest episodes and industry insights. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.